Hello, and welcome to Grandpa's School of Street Rod Building. In this series, I'm going to build a 1941 Willys street rod, although the principles discussed can be applied to any street rod build, so please hit that subscribe button. And feel free to ask any questions in the comments section below, and I'll try to answer them. You can also leave rude and witty comments. That's what I do. When I was a young boy, my hobby was building model cars, and the 41 Willys was one of my favorites. I just thought it was really cool. In school, about half the pages of my notebooks were filled with the doodling of cars, among which many were 41 Willys. I actually knew somebody who had one. This is not the same car, theirs was dark green. But it was stock, like this one, and it gave me a bad case of Willys envy. I vowed that someday I would have one of these cars. Nowadays, when I go to car shows, I see a lot of Willys that are what's called a gasser. Gasser will have a custom chassis, a roll bar, a supercharged engine with a blower sticking out of the hood, and a fiberglass body. Some guys put a lot of money into the paint finish and the interiors. The only miles these cars get on them is from the trailer to the showroom. But I really appreciate them because it really gives me inspiration on what I can, the possibilities that you can do with a street rod. I'm seeing more and more airbag suspension systems at the car shows. These actually an airbag provides a very good ride. And when you get to the car show, you let the air out and it sits down low and it really looks nice. Some guys build street rods that basically have all the amenities of a luxury car. It's just something novel they want to park in their driveway to show off to their friends at home and at the country club. One of the virtues of the Willys is that even though the original car had a little tiny four-cylinder engine, there's enough room under that hood for a big block V8. Even with all that room, some builders just can't resist putting on so many accessories to superchargers and blowers. They have to pop up through the hood. I'm building a rod for touring, and I'm going to be spending a lot of time in it. So when I go to the car shows, I really like to look at the interiors for inspiration. Now this one here, there's really nothing stock in that interior. That's not a stock dash, nor console, nor steering wheel, or seats. Another advantage of going with a pre-war vehicle is that the original interiors are simple and low cost. So if you have a budget constraint, and this is one of the places where you may be able to save some money. However, since I'm going to be spending a lot of time in my Willys, I want to put a little bit more money into that part of the car and make it very comfortable. One of my important factors is leg room. I went to a car show and a guy allowed me to sit in his Willys. It did not have enough leg room, but his had a high back seat. An advantage of the Willys is you can put a low back seat, as you see in here, and it gives you a few more inches of space. I'm not worried about, the advantage of a headrest is whiplash, but with a Willys body, your head's going to hit that back window or back wall anyway, so you really don't need a headrest. I, for one, enjoy working with wood and leather and metal, and I found this interior extremely inspiring. I only have a photo of it. I don't know if that's actually wood or if it's an applique over plastic. I don't know, but it really looks nice. At the car shows, a lot of people want to see what's in the trunk. Now this particular Willys is a Pro Street. It's got the big fat boy tires, and the wheel tubs are moved inward. You can see his fuel cell there and a tank up above that tells me that he's got his suspension bagged. A lot of guys ask me how much this is going to cost. Well, that really depends on what you've already got, such as your facility and your tools and equipment. Then there's the, well, you can see here all the different cost centers of the vehicle. Some guys claim you can build a custom car for $10,000 under if you really watch your budget. That's really rare. Most projects will cost right around $40,000 and up. If you want to have a car that wins awards at the SEMA show, you better plan on spending between $250,000 or more. When I go to the car shows and start talking to the owners, I'm surprised. Well, I shouldn't say I'm surprised, but I'll tell you right out front. Most of them bought the car. They didn't build it themselves. The reason why is you actually save money doing that. There's a number of reasons why people sell their project cars. Now, I'll tell you a little bit about it. You're going to spend a little bit more if you buy a car that's got a metal body versus a fiberglass body. The kit cars just don't pull the price of the metal bodies. So if you really want to get some money out of it someday, you start with a metal body. When you go out shopping for a Willys project car to start with, you probably have it in your mind to look for and find something like this. When I was a kid, you could find something like this for about $100 on a used car lot, but not anymore. It's going to cost you a bundle when you find something 80 years old like the 41 Willys, and in reasonably good condition like this one here. I didn't take this picture, I just found it on the internet, and I'm a little bit suspicious it might be a Patina job. Sadly, there's a lot of bodies that have just basically been thrown out in the back 40, sitting on the ground in contact with the wet ground and the soil chemistry, and 3 or 4 inches up the car will be rusted away completely. It's a lot of work to bring something like this back to drivable condition. This owner at least had the horse sense, pardon the pun, to put the car up on blocks so it wouldn't be in contact with the soil. However, the rear window's missing, the trunk's missing, and your back end floor could be rotted out. You just have to inspect it. There's a bunch like this where the owner has taken at least some care in the preservation of the body. A lot of cars you'll find will be missing a hood, trunk deck, and yeah, it gets rusty down in there, and that might be able to repair it, but it's really difficult to find trunk lids, hoods, other body parts that are missing. You know, when you're out shopping for a body, you know, hold out till you find one that's got all the major body parts. This would be considered a very good barn find. Yeah, it's a gasser, and it's probably been raced and rotted. You got to realize the history of the Willys. After World War II, these soldier boys came home, and a lot of them got into the drag race scene. Very popular then, the street rods. And the Willys is a popular body because it was lightweight, and you could put a big block engine in it. There are a few metal body cars out there that are in pristine condition, like this one. If your ultimate goal is to own and drive a period correct 41 Willys, this is the ideal vehicle for you. But if you want to build a street rod or a pro street, take something that's been cared for 80 years and is in condition like this would be pure sacrilege. So leave this car for those guys, the purists who want to have a pristine, period correct vehicle. Now this is the look I'm going for. It's called a resto mod. It's basically a modern car in an 80-year-old package. These bodies will be fiberglass. Fiberglass is a great material. It's lightweight. When you buy it, it's all straight. There's no rust. It'll never rust on you, except for some metal parts here and there. But actually, it's a very good value if that's the look you're going for. There's a number of manufacturers that make a 41 Willys fiberglass body. I went with this company, Scott Rods, out of Monroeville, Ohio, because they have one that fits on a Chevy S10 chassis. I'm going to need a donor anyway. And the Chevy S10 is actually a very sturdy chassis. It's actually mechanically it's overkill, but heck, you're going to end up with a very good driving car. You're not going to make a lot of awards at the car shows with that chassis, but Chevrolet has there's so many aftermarket parts for your engine, transmission, your suspension. You really end up saving some money on your entire project by going to something like this. The S10 hit the market in 1984, and they made a lot of them for almost 20 years. This is a Gen 1. The nice thing about this is you just really need the chassis and a few other parts. You don't have to worry about, dings and rust and bad smells. You can pick one up very inexpensive. The Gen 2, which ran from about 94 to 2004, is definitely a better looking truck. You don't need to get one that's in pristine condition like this. So what if it's got some dings, rusts, beat up parts, bad smells? Again, this is a donor vehicle. I'm sure you could pick up something like this cheap, but my guess is there's some chassis damage and suspension damage, and it's been in a flood apparently, and you never want to keep a transmission, differential, or engine out of a car that's been flooded. An advantage of going with a donor is there's just a lot of parts on the vehicle that you can put into your Willys. And I'm not really going to go into detail a lot, and this is obviously not an all-inclusive parts list, but I do want to emphasize the title. Your Department of Transportation, face it, it's a bureaucracy, and if they have something like an existing title to start with, it just makes their job a lot easier. It's a lot less headache for you. The Chevy S10 came with either an inline 4 or a V6. This is the inline 4. I seriously doubt you'll want to put this in your Willys. You can sell it. Maybe you'll get lucky. Who knows? If your S10 came with the bigger V6, you've got a better chance of selling this on the used engine market. It's also, it actually is a very powerful engine. You'll burn some rubber. I don't know anybody who's kept one and put it in their Willys project, but it would definitely move you down the road with all the speed you'd want if you did decide to keep it. But the V8, that's the hot rodder's traditional engine. There's a number of reasons why. There's a lot of aftermarket parts. I'm going to devote an entire YouTube video to just the engine. Whether you go with a crate or if you rebuild one, there's some considerations that you need to take into mind up front in planning your entire vehicle. It does affect your choices of other components downstream. There's actually a lot of parts you can sell from your donor vehicle. There is a market for used truck parts. Some of them are collision centers, obviously, but there's also a lot of people who fix their vehicles up in their driveway, save some money. I've done this myself before. Unfortunately, there's a few parts that just aren't going to sell. You're going to end up taking them to the scrapyard, the metal scrapyard, or to the dump. The cab, for example, nobody's going to want that. And the scrapyards won't take it unless you provide a title. And you don't want to give up your title, so what you do there is you get out your Sawzall and you cut up in little pieces. Then it's just scrap metal, and they have no problem taking scrap metal. And they give you a few bucks for it. This is my 41 Willys Coupe project. I've gone as far as I can go until the body gets here. As you can see, there's no S10 parts on there anymore, or I should say S10 pickup looking parts. You'll be stripping it down to the rails and cross members. You'll be taking off everything that unbolts, unscrews, unplucks, unpries, whatever you want to call it. Now, before you get started on your project, I strongly recommend that you do something with your garage floor, shop floor, such as putting an epoxy finish on it. It really helps to keep the place clean. You are going to spill, there's no question about that. I also installed a shop sink. It just helps to keep things clean. I also use it to quench parts. One tool, if you don't already have one, is an engine hoist. Some people call them a cherry picker. But you're going to need that for this project. They're not terribly expensive. You can pick one up for a few $100 at Harbor Freight or other places. This is a jig fixture I use for picking up my engine. There's a hook up the top that hooks onto the cherry picker and 4 straps that hang down and they bolt onto the cylinder head bolts. This is made of Simpson strong ties and a 2x6. You will need to invest in a welder. This is the Forney Easy Weld. They're about $300 or less. There's plenty of online videos on YouTube that you can use as tutorials. It's not difficult. It plugs into 110 volts. Get a good welding mask. The technology is quite advanced these days. Most people can pick it up pretty quickly. Save a few scrap pieces from your teardown and do some practicing. Welding's a lot easier than you might imagine. You will be removing part of the front end of the chassis rails, a section called the horns. They're called the horns because here at the front they kind of curve up at an angle, and that's where the bumper attached and the cross member for the substructure that held the radiator in. But a Sawzall just takes that right down. You'll make your cut about 1 inch forward of the steering box. A Sawzall with a good blade in it makes the fast work. After that, you touch up the edges with your grinding wheel so you don't leave a sharp edge to cut yourself on. Now these are your upper and lower control arms. You're going to want to, you have to take those off to do all your chassis prep. If they're in good shape, you can put them back on. And what I mean by good shape is if the bushings and the rubber grommets inside them are all in good shape, you can put it back on. But this is a 20-year-old truck, and chances are they're not in the best of shape. A word to the wise, ball joints and bushings are real hard to remove from your control arms. It requires special press equipment to do it. It's a little more expensive to buy new control arms with the bushings and the ball joints already in them, but the labor savings and the good quality of the results is just the better way to go. On your steering system, this is a 20+ year old vehicle that you're starting with, and a lot of your joints may not be in the best of condition. All these knuckles and stuff. You can buy replacement parts, but for right now, what's important is you're going to tear that all off. And the keeping parts are your sway bar and the steering box. I went with a remanufactured steering box. The remanufacturer was Cardone. I found them on Rock Auto. Autoparts.com is another place. Used to be J.C. Whitney's. You can get these remanufactured steering boxes at a very good price to send in your core. An alternative thing that some guys do is they replace the front end with a rack and pinion steering system. Some guys really like that. I consider this good enough for what I'm doing. I'm just making a touring rod. I'm not going to race the car. Not doing a lot of performance stuff with. If it were a sports car, yes, rack and pinion's the way to go. But for what I'm doing, just putting around the country, the conventional steering system is quite adequate. You will be relocating your motor mounts back about 9 inches. That's Scott's words. This surface here and over here are where the S10 original motor mounts attach to the chassis. I'm going to point out something interesting. That's about 2 fingers wide, and over here is about 3 fingers wide. I point this out because your motor mounts are not, your chassis is not symmetrical. For whatever reason, Chevy shifted the engine over to the passenger side 0.47 inches. Your V8 motor mounts on that, you've got a symmetrical engine pretty much down the spine of the vehicle. So when you're building your structure to build your new motor mounts, you want to index off the outside of the chassis rails, not the inside, because it's not symmetrical on the inside. This is the new motor mount, mounted about 9 inches, actually it's 8 inches, 8.5 inches back from where it was originally. You'll see I used a 1.5 inch stock bar to kind of raise my motor mount bracket. You don't need that. And the reason I put that in there is because when I was in high school, I had a 66 Chevy I drove, had little 14-inch wheels, and it's kind of a heavy car. I bottomed out a lot, and I didn't want to bottom out with my Willys. But this is a lighter weight body. It's also got stiffer springs, bigger wheels. I never bottomed out with my S10 on some very rough roads here in Texas. And I really know that I won't bottom out anyway with the Willys. So you really don't need this 1.5 inch bar in here. Just take your 1/4 inch plate, weld it down on the chassis rail. The important thing is this is the bracket for the front brake lines. You don't want to weld over this threaded hole here that it attaches to, nor the slot here that kind of keeps it square. Just stay back on this back side of the chassis and you'll be fine. After you've welded the top plate on, you'll flip your chassis over and weld a piece there. This welds to the lower control arm housing. And you'll just cut a piece of metal that braces on there and gives you lots of good bracing and strength in there. So as that engine pounds up and down over the years, it isn't going to bend and break. Since you're moving the engine back 9 inches, or I should say the motor mounts, and because you're also probably going to put a V8 or something in there much bigger than what an S10 comes with, and some guys even replace the transmission with something a little stockier. And you can see a transmission crossbar here. That's not an original transmission crossbar position. The original position was right here. Here's 4 bolt holes that you access and pulled off this end. On the other side, it kind of had a shelf that it mounted on. You'll see that bracket there, and it's part of the new brake system. That was the other end of the cross member. But anyway, it unbolts, and I used a aftermarket bar because it was just too much effort to remanufacture the stock cross member to fit the new position. So I just bought an aftermarket cross member, and I, like before, I bored some holes in the side rails and made it accessible so I can unbolt that cross member in the future should I ever need to remove the transmission. That's just the way the vehicle's designed, and it's just a good way to do it. You will be removing 16, 18 inches or so of the back end of the chassis rails off. Scott's guide shows you exactly where that is. And then you'll be welding an 1.5 inch square tube at the top and another one down here at the bottom. I welded some intercostals in for extra strength. When you take that back end off, it takes the original leaf spring shackle mounts out. This is a different, you'll be putting new, when you rebuild the suspension, you'll go with a shorter leaf spring. You'll also be taking out the pickup bed mounts, the rear pickup bed mounts. You can see here some of the remains of another cross member. I just came in with a sawzall and cut it down and trimmed it in. Used another special cutter to cut it back up in here underneath. And that bar was used for mounting the spare tire and the shock absorbers. and it's removed to make way for the fuel tank that you'll mount back here. In the S10, the fuel tank is kind of up here in the middle section. It's now in the way of your exhaust system, so it's got to come out. You'll be adding a new cross member here for that 1.5 inch square tube. This is for mounting the upper end of your shock absorbers. Also, I use it for the bracket on the front of the fuel tank. Now in Scott's guide, he mounts his fuel tank up underneath the rails here. I prefer to do it this way. And this bar here stays. This is part of the original chassis. And that bar, and this new bar, and that bar are all on the same level. And they provide structural strength for the trunk floor of your Willys. You need a very good sturdy trunk floor. There are 4 cab mounts welded to the chassis rails that you will be removing. This is one on the front. This is one on the where one on the back was. Some guys use a plasma cutter to cut them off. That makes fast work. I don't have the scraps here anymore. They've long since gone off to the scrap metal yard, to show you why it's kind of difficult to use the Sawzall to take them off. I used a side cutter with a special grinding blade. The pickup bed also has 4 mounts that you'll be removing. This one's the forward bed mount. There's one on each side. Now your back bed mounts, you don't have to take them off, because when you cut your section off the end of the chassis rails, that piece comes off. So, yeah, it makes fast work of it. A standard length S10 pickup has a 108-inch wheelbase, and a Willys Coupe has a 102-inch wheelbase. And what that means is you're going to be moving your rear differential forward 6 inches. It basically unbolts from the leaf springs, and then your leaf springs unbolt. You've got from the front bracket here, and you'll be taking that, unbolting that bracket as well. Don't throw the bracket away, you're going to reuse it. I'm going to have a whole video on just the rear differential later, so it's just important right now to tell you that it's going to be removed. In the differential disassembly process, you do have to disconnect the drive shaft from the rear differential. It's really quite simple. If you haven't done it before, there's just 2 bolts here, removes a little bracket. Same on the other side. So it's basically 4 bolts, 2 brackets, and a little elbow grease. You can pull that drive shaft right loose and drop it down and pull it out of the other end out of the transmission. You want to have a bucket handy underneath your tailstock of your transmission when you remove the drive shaft, because it's full of transmission fluid back in there. When you pull it out, it's just going to leak all over and make a big mess. So make sure you have a bucket under that. This is the front brake bracket. It simply unbolts. There's one on each side. This is your brake line. Yeah, you'll be removing your brake lines. And you want to save that part because it's going back on. You refinish it so that it matches your chassis. And it's easy to put back on. This is the brake line bracket for the rear brakes. It has to be cut off and moved forward since you're moving your, did I mention that? Anyway, you're moving your rear axle forward about 6 inches. And so you're going to have to move this forward about 6 inches. And I just welded just a little bit forward of this new cross member that I welded into place. This is the bracket which I mount the shock absorbers to. You'll mount your shock absorbers to this cross member. And you'll also, well, I hung my gas tank off this bar as well. I think Scott, in his guide, I think he's hanging it off the side rails. I just hung it off back here. That's just me. We're all done with the dismantling and the welding. You go pick up a little wire wheel for your drill motor like this, and you take your chassis out into your driveway, because it's a very messy job. You don't want all that mess in your garage. And you grind and grind and grind and grind and get all the rust you can off that chassis. Wipe it down with a good cleaner. I use mineral spirits. And then you hit it with a rust encapsulator. When that cures, you get a good primer and put on it, and then a good chassis paint. And then you start your reassembly process. So much fun. And that's pretty well is going to wrap up this video. I'm going to discuss other issues, the reassembly in subsequent videos. I'm going to talk about motors, rebuilding differentials, transmissions. There's a whole bunch of topics. And we'll hit it all, so you don't want to miss them. Subscribe. If you have questions, put them down in the comment section. If you have witty and rude remarks to make, go ahead and put those down in the comment section. It's karma, because I do it all the time. Everybody, thank you for watching this, and stay tuned. We'll have more to share with you.